Good day to you. This is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia series. Today I have with me Ian Collier from the Grey Scouts, a unit I have a lot of respect for. And he's verily one of our donkey wallopers / cavalry. So I've been looking at his synopsis before the talk. It's a long and interesting one, and quite a bit of it on the technical side of riding horses and how patrols are carried out in the bush and that type of thing. So, Ian, it's good to see you, good to meet you at last. And we've had a little chat off screen, so we're all ready to go. What's the weather like there in Perth?
It's a killer. We've had over 40, 45, 46, 47. I think tonight it's still about 35, 36. It's 8 o'clock at night. So we've had a stretch of about 4 or 5 days of real heat wave. It's draining.
Well,
like John,
I will swap our swimming pool per hour rainfall that we're getting. But today and yesterday we saw a bit of sunshine, so I put it on the calendar. But anyway, let's begin with your story. Give us a background of where you're from and how you ended up in the army.
Okay, I'm a pretty average middle class Rhodesian born back in the 50s, 59. My dad was a bank manager for Beverly Building Society, and my mom was a nurse. Born in Salisbury in 59, and just had a normal Rhodesian suburban upbringing. In 1969, I went up to a little school called Eagle Preparatory School for boys. That was a very interesting place. It was up in the Vumba, tiny. It was only 120 boys from standard 1 to standard 5. We called them forms. It was founded by a guy by the name of Frank Carey back in the 40s, late 40s after the war. And he styled it on the English public school system. We believe that he used to teach at a school called Dragon School in Wales. And he transferred that concept, the English public school, to Rhodesia, to the colonies. And so we had a very little school, rudimentary in the beginning, like a farm school, but it grew. At the biggest it ever grew to was about 120 boys over 5 years. We had small classes. I don't think we had a class bigger than 15 or 16 in our classes, but it was very much outdoors. It was up in the mountains. It was a boarding school. There was no day scholars. So we had, and we had a lot of the colonial guys from Malawi, Zambia. A lot of them were expats. Their parents were expats in Malawi and Zambia, growing tea, growing maize, farmers. And they sent their kids down to Rhodesia for a public school education. And so it was very mixed. We had guys from Mozambique, a couple of guys who actually lived in Beira, and they would make the sort of 120-kilometer drive through to us. Normal 13-week terms, 3 terms in the year. And we played all the normal sports. So we had cricket, we had rugby at junior school, cricket, rugby, athletics, cross country. We didn't really go on exit weekends or anything. I think we had 1 or 2 a term. So we used to go and wander around in the bush. And you can imagine that these 9, 10, 11-year-olds wandering around in little groups of 3, just fishing. We always had a catty or something like that, shooting birds.
Idyllic life, eh?
Sorry?
Idyllic life.
Yeah, absolutely. So real sort of farm boy bush school start. And one of the interesting things is we had horse riding. So there was a riding school up the road on the way to the Leopard Rock Hotel. And they used to bring horses along on Friday afternoon. And the various age groups would then go through and ride the horses. It was an extracurricular activity, but so not everyone did it. Some guys went and played tennis or something like that. But that's where I really got stuck into horses. And I actually found out I was quite good with it. And that was Eagle. So in 72, I moved on. The other interesting thing about Eagle is that people may not know is Eagle was became known as the Elam Mission. in 1976, 77. My dad was the chairman of the board for Eagle, and the security situation was deteriorating rapidly up in the Bomba. And they made a call as a board to close the school and relocate the kids down to Springvale in Barradellas. By then, they were losing pupils. The parents in Zambia, the parents in Rhodesia, Malawi, weren't happy with the security situation. So the ones that wanted to stay carried on. They were transferred through to Springvale, and they started their own house, if I can call it that, and that was the Eagle House at Springvale. And then the Elam Mission took over the school. So when the massacre took place in 77, 78, we saw the pictures. My dad was indicated, and the board that they did the right thing. But you know, they still had a school which they had to keep going, and the rental that they were getting from the Elam missionaries was sort of kept the staff going. That was the black staff there. They lived in a compound just below the school. And it was a disaster, absolute disaster. When I saw the pictures, I can take you to the exact spot where those pictures were taken to this day.
Alan, for the sake of our foreign viewers, a lot of people might not know what the Elam massacre was, but it was essentially a group of missionaries that were there at the school, Eagle Prep School, and they came there during the night and rounded them up, and unfortunately killed all of them. Is that correct?
That's correct. They rounded them all up. They took them up to what we knew as the Mello field. And Claude Mello used to be the headmaster there. And so we had a top field called Mello Field, and we had a cricket pavilion adjoining the field. And all the missionaries, the wives, the missionaries, the kids, the babies were herded up to the top field. There was a little, I could call it a little glade. Let's call it a glade. There was trees, and we used to have picnics and everything up there. And basically slaughtered them.
Terrible.
And I think, you know, and a lot of the Mtali guys, obviously the police and the army who were based up in Mtali. Eagle, it always seemed a long way, but I think it was only about 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers from Mtali. Were mobilized, and I think the black staff actually advised them what was going on. There was a farm down the road. I think there were the peacocks. Literally, the farm was probably a kilometer away, and the peacocks may have advised the army. I'm not too sure how the army got advised of what had gone down.
Yeah, it was absolutely dreadful. Yeah, I've seen the photographs, as I'm sure you have. It was an appalling event in our history.
Yeah.
And so from there, where did you go from? It would have been then Springvale. Where did you go from there?
Okay, so I'd left in 72. In 73, I went down to Falcon. Now, Falcon is down in the Essexville area. And it was basically the brother school, that big brother school to Eagle. It was founded by the same guy, Frank Carey, in about 1949, 1950, on the same basis, obviously a lot bigger, from Form 1 through to Upper 6. I think there were about 360 odd pupils at the school in those days. And all on the same basis. We had guys from Zambia, we had guys from Malawi, we had guys from South Africa, a lot of Matabele land parents, farmers, and obviously the school rivalries. We were out in the bush. Again, it was all boarding. I think the only guys who didn't board were actually teachers' kids. The rest of us were all boarders. And the same thing, we didn't get many exits. So once again, we had the run of the bush. We had the mine dumps. We had the bush. There's a couple of conservation areas around there as well. And I think there it was great fun as well. Although I must say that it was also a place you could be pretty naughty. You know, when I was in Form 3, ran away with a mate from Zambia. It was his intention to get all the way up to Mazabuka or Choma. Sadly, he's passed away. but I won't mention his name. But anyway, we managed to, on the coldest night of the year, it was the middle of winter, June, tracksuits, tackies. So now are we going to run away? So BC, I'll just use that. Decided he was getting bullied and he didn't like it. So I said, wake up. You wake me up when you go. And I want to see that he went. He said, no, come with me, don't you scared. So we ran away. We walked all the way to past Llewellyn, from Falcon, and it was cold. So, but once we got past Llewellyn, some nice auntie picked us up. So, great, and said, oh, where are you going? She said, no, we're going to, I was going to Salisbury, and Brian says, no, he's going to Salisbury as well. Anyway, then we got to the Willow Road, hitched another car, got to Gwello, and he thought, okay, this was about 9 o'clock in the morning now. Let's go to a cafe, get some Coke and buns, some stuff like that. And I promise you, we weren't 2 minutes outside the cafe, having bought our Coke and buns, and the cops walked down there and picked us up. So, yeah, headmaster came and fetched us back to school. Obviously, we got caned, good and proper.
But you know, Alan, they were wonderful days. I mean, I live in England, and the health and safety regulations that are imposed on children have made them almost zombie-like. I say this with all due respect to the British people, but unless you have organized trips out into the country that's carefully monitored, nothing happens, you know. And I think it's robbed not only this country but many countries of that sort of lion spirit where you can just get out. But when we grew up, the freedom that we had to just wander around the bush where there were snakes and other snares, it was just incredible. We had a wonderful childhood, all of us.
Oh, absolutely. We had dams in the area at Falcon. We had dams. We had the mine dumps. We used to go into the mine dumps. They were very dangerous. But we would dig caves in the mine dumps. We would go and smoke. We would brew beer.
I ended up I ended up up to my waist in clay at a mine dump, and
you always went with a couple of mates and got up to mischief. But one of the interesting, and we went up to A levels there. In our post Form 4 year, which was O levels, we had very interesting, which had largely fallen away by that time, was cadets. And cadets was compulsory. The Zambians had to do it, the Malawians had to do it, and all those guys, knowing of course that we had to go on to national service, everybody had to do cadets. And there was weapon handling, there was drill, there was bushcraft. We had to, one weekend we had a camp, and it was a route march, and we had to do the map reading. And it was every Monday afternoon, full afternoon. Then we'd go down to the mine dumps, and we had a shooting range. And the instructors were largely teachers who were all Peace Reserve during the school holidays. So we had access to the weapons. So we had the FMs, we had the shotguns. And being mainly farmer kids and used to a bush life, everyone was pretty useful at shooting. That was great fun. But what it did do is it set us up for when the guys who had to do national service, it set us up. We were just probably 2 or 3 weeks ahead of the city boys. When you get into basics, a lot of the city boys, and I will get into that a little bit later, but a lot of the city boys were clueless. They didn't know how to sew buttons on their shirts. They didn't know how to polish their shoes. They didn't know how to iron their clothes. And all these little skills that we actually had taken for granted at a boarding school were already there, and so you're already 2 or 3, after 2 or 3 weeks, everyone's been hammered into them, and they've learned how to sew a button, get rid of idle threads, and dress properly and polish your boots. These guys had caught up, but we were already a little bit ahead of them. So it made things a little bit easier for us as having done the cadets and the boarding school thing. So Falcon was a great school. For my sins, I did some strange subjects. I did Latin for A level, which I flunked at Falcon. but I had my matric exemption, which was fine for university. And but I was supposed to go into the army in 1978, but because I'd flunked my A's, I got deferred to 163 in January 79. So from there, Falcon was great. We had it punched above its weight. The schools we played rugby, cricket, athletics, cross country, squash, tennis, all the main sports. And we had some great sportsmen there as well. And, you know, guys who played Cradle League rugby or Nuffield cricket, Rhodesia hockey. In fact, we always had a very good hockey team, water polo. So it was, and always punched above its weight against, Milton, Hamilton, Gifford, Plumtree. Plumtree was like a sister school to us. Lots of rivalry on the field and lots of merrymaking off the field. We used to have an annual drinking thing with the Plumtree guys called the Faltree 5000 or the 500. And normally the sort of the first or second day for school holidays, you wanted to meet at the Holiday Inn in Bullawa. All the Plumtree guys would come up, and Alan Yorks and the Chappie Rosenfelsens and all those guys, and we'd have a flat out piss up. We were 18 by then, and then we all met up in national service. So moving on to Grays and national service, as I say, I went in January, beginning of January 79, take 163. And we were called up differently to the previous guys who all went to Llewellyn. We went to Cranbourne. So we were all called up to Cranbourne, and I think it probably made sense. Most of the guys who've been called up lived in Salisbury. It was actually central. And and they were calling for volunteers direct into units. Previously, and I think you go right back into the text 145 or something like that, where they took RLI guys direct. But they may have all gone to Llewellyn first and then to RLI. I think it was one of the first intakes where we could volunteer direct to units. It cut down a lot of the crap, and it was quite a big intake. I don't think Llewellyn could have handled 600 guys coming in at the same time. So there's 600 guys, long hair, civvies, sitting on the fields at Cranbourne. And they would shout out and say, who wants to join SAS? Sort of 100, 200 guys would stand up and say, okay, come here. And those guys would go. And then it was RLI, armored cars. And I was just happened to be sitting with a couple of mates with whom I used to ride horses. I didn't really know what I was going to do. But the one thing I knew is they called for Grey Scouts. I was the right height, I was the right weight. I knew some guys who I happened to be sitting with, and it beats walking now. I thought, man, I don't want to join a unit where I'm going to have to walk through the bush for days on end, and of course sounds like a good idea. And I'll be honest, it was a little bit intimidating. When I asked for RLI, there were plenty. There was probably 250 guys stood up out of the 600 guys there. And they had them running around the field and doing press-ups and star jumps and doing all that type of stuff. And I thought, oh, that looks like a little bit tough. Let's go and join the horses. So one of from a technical point of view, you had to be no heavier than 80 kilograms. You had to be no taller than 5'10". We still talk in the old imperials there. And you also couldn't be too short either. So they wanted people who were sort of 5'5", 5'6", through to about 5'8", and weighed 70, 75 kilograms maximum. And if you were outside those parameters, that was their first cut. In the end, 60 odd guys, maybe 62. The instructors who were looking at us was Stretch Atkinson. Now, Stretch is about 6'2", so it was a little bit bizarre with the rules. But anyway, so there was Stretch. There was Dan Brunt also. He was 6-footer, and they were the guys who were doing the selection and the cuts. So we got down to about 62. They said, okay, fine. And there was a big green DAF truck, I think it's a 16 tonner. And they loaded us in there, and there was I think there were 2 green DAFs, and we were loaded in there, and it was full of straw and old horse shit and that type of stuff. And we went off to Inkomo, which was also a bonus. It's near Salisbury, bright lights. It's for us Salisbury guys, because that's where my folks live. For us Salisbury guys, being close to bright lights was a hell of a lot better than Llewellyn, which was miles away. So we ended up at Inkomo. It was still fairly rudimentary when we got there. They just built 2 new barrack rooms for us. There may have been a previous intake, but from Llewellyn into Grays that had used them, and we were fitted 30 guys to a barrack room, 2 barrack rooms, 2 corporals in charge of each barrack room. Our instructors were Collier McNeilage. What a great guy. He was tough as nails, fair. He was sort of our senior NCO, Collier Mac. And then we had Stretch Atkinson and Dan Brunt in our barrack room. And then there was Devonish, Corporal Devonish, and just trying to remember the other name, Corporal Walker, yeah, Ken Walker, yeah. So Ken and Devonish looked after barrack room 2, and it was strictly alphabetical order. So A to Z, Z ending in the last bed in barrack room 2. A was the first bed in barrack room 1. So and that was the beginning. It's a little bit hazy. I think you're a little bit intimidated, running around fetching kit. We could see the horse lines. They had joined the barrack room, and the barracks. They were literally probably 50 meters away, the horse lines. Then it was marching up to the QM store, getting our kit. Interesting thing about kit is that we didn't get the stick boots. We only got lightweights, which was great. That was the brown lightweights, and there was very good reason for that. Stick boots have a sole which is too wide for stirrups. So the last thing you want to do is, if you're galloping along on a horse and you're wearing stick boots, and you fall off, your leg gets left behind in the stirrup, and then you're going to be banging along on your head behind your horse. So we got our clandestines for PT and that type of stuff, but our operational boots were lightweights, and they were a lot more comfortable than stick boots. We didn't have to bone up 2 pairs of boots and that type of stuff as well. Moving from there, we got issued our horses relatively quickly. It was in the first week, and the horses were kept in basically rudimentary log pole stalls, if I can say that. They had cover, but they were open, and from then on, our instructors on the equitation side was Warrant Officer Nick van Heerden. We used to call him Sergeant Major Nick van Heerden. What an excellent horseman. He had a couple of different theories about horsemanship, riding horses and horsemanship, and his biggest thing is that you have to be one with the horse. The other interesting thing is that when we were all volunteering for Grays, you didn't have to even touch the horse in your life. In fact, Nick van Heerden said he'd rather not you'd ever ridden a horse, because you didn't want to have to break out all the old habits you'd had. Now, we had a lot of farmers that volunteered, and farmers have one way of riding their ponies in the bush or the farm. Then you had the riding school guys, then you had the show jumpers and the dressage guys, and they'd all been through different riding school teachers, I guess, in their day. And Nick wanted to thrash that all out of them and start again, start with a clean slate. And the clean slate literally started off with lunging horses. Now, lunging a horse is basically just making him walk in a circle with a long rein, a long rope from his head to you, you stand in the middle, and you talk, and you try and get the horse to walk, trot, canter in a circle, using your voice, using a little bit of rein on your rope to slow them down, but a lot of voice talking to your horse, making sure that he's bent in towards you rather than his head moving away from you. Those are all bad signs of horses with balance. They get injured if they're off balance. So we started off just getting used to our horses, lunging them around in circles, moving them in. We had to learn, obviously, all our kit. Our kit was different. Our kit, we used a McClellan saddle, which looks very much like a classical cowboy saddle. McClellan saddle comes from way back in the 1800s from the US cavalry. It has a high pommel and cantle. The pommel is the front part in front of your waist, and the cantle is behind your bum, quite high. So you're almost sitting inside. A normal, what they call a GP saddle, general purpose saddle, has a very low seat. It's padded. It's got lots of leather on it. It's also got saddle flaps, so your legs don't rub. Ours were basically fiberglass frames with leather over them, and then various things to hook up your horse. Right, so we got our horses, but it has to be remembered that we were actually soldiers first. We were at Grey Scouts, and this is where a lot of confusion comes in, because they think we were the cavalry, the charge of the light brigade and sabers and all that kind of stuff, the sort of the glamorous stuff from history. And the bottom line is that we were mounted infantry. Our basic course before we got badged was an 18-week course. And we had to, first of all, we were soldiers. And secondly, we were mounted on horses, and there were a means to an end. But we had the fortunate thing about being in Greys is we weren't subject to all the bullshit that a normal infantry soldier had to undergo, because we had other responsibilities, and that was looking after our horses. The other thing I've already mentioned, it was preferred that you didn't have any background with horses as well. So it was taken as given that you hadn't touched a horse in your life, and you were taken right down back to basics. And the equitation guys essentially had about 6 weeks, first phase, to whip us into shape and get us relatively competent on the back of a horse. And at all the gates, walk, trot, canter, gallop, dismount at speed, dismounting at a trot, dismounting at a walk, all the veterinary side of horses, what to feed them, how to look after your horses in the bush, when to feed them, what to do, what not to do, so they became your second rifle, your second wife. Your rifle was your first wife because you're an infantry soldier, and your second wife was your horse. And that was quite a lot. It was a big responsibility. And a lot of guys who did come, and they were literally had never touched a horse in their lives. You had to learn how to pick up their feet, clean out their hooves, check to see there were no injuries, run your hands down their legs, under their chest, pull ticks out of their backsides, pull ticks away from their stifle area. Well, their stifle area is where their penis is. And you've got to be able to put your hand up in there, pull out the ticks, and we had quite a lot of ticks up in Inkomo and in the grasslands there, and without getting kicked to death. And we had quite a lot of double taps. Certain horses you didn't walk up behind, because they would sense you there, and you would suddenly have a double tap to the chest, and you'd be flying 2-3 meters away. Yeah. Great fun. But there was a serious side to it. So in our first phase, we went through all the normal first phase stuff. We had change parades, we had inspections, we had sergeant major's inspections, we had CO's inspections, and we would be on the go from about 5 o'clock in the morning through 9, 10 o'clock at night. When the infantry guys, the instructors, that would be Stretch and Dan and those guys, when they had us, we would be doing infantry stuff. We would be on the parade square. We would have to learn how to march. Fortunately for me, I'd done cadets, so I did know some of the commands, and I did have some sort of coordination and training. Like in all the armies, we had a couple of our Goma pals who marched like camels. And yeah, the last thing you wanted to do was the camels, so I won't mention names. With Sergeant Major Hoskin, also ex-RLI, he was our SSM for HQ and training troop. Man, he could punch as well, you know, on the parade square. And this was all without horses. So we had our drill from 8 o'clock in the morning, whether it was Stretch or Dan or Devonish or Ken Walker, had us on the drill square. And we actually became fairly functional, maybe a little bit sloppy, but we also had other things we had to go and do. Then we'd go into equitation, and we'd spend another 2 or 3 hours on the horses with the equitation instructors. And they were also damn good. Couple of regulars, couple of territorials. I can talk about the territorials and the regulars and the national servicemen later. And that really moved around the squadron system that we had. After first phase, we were pretty good on a horse. The guys were starting to mess around and make them buck and that type of stuff. And then we went into second phase and then coin phase. Coin phase was interesting because we were mounted infantry. We used the horses as a means to an end, to patrol, follow up, chase, and but we could do it at speed. The horse can cover 40, 50 Ks in a day. We would try and stay close to water, but we didn't have to because we could carry extra water on our horses. So we could, and we did during the 79. We did quite a lot of operations into Mozambique and patrolled. There were more harassing operations along the power lines, but we could move fast. There were incidents where Prelimo, Sandler were chasing us, trying to throw, lob mortars in front of us, but the horses, they just couldn't keep their mortaring on track because we were moving so fast. It would be a little bit easier if you were chasing guys on foot and they're ducking and diving and anti-tracking. You can't really anti-track on a horse. They leave spur. But we could move fast and we could carry extra equipment. So the day started normally about 5 o'clock. We'd go down, feed your horses, water the horses, back to the barrack room, clean, then have barrack room inspection. Then we'd go and back to the parade square, get our stuff back to the parade square, do an hour or two of drill, and then back onto the horses. Afternoons generally were weapons training and obviously tactics. And and then afternoon was PT. So we had PT, we had the log PT, the same as all the other guys. We had 3 particularly horrible telephone poles, which we named Inkomo, Sitole, and Bobby. You can guess which was the biggest, fattest one, which everyone tried to avoid. Mugabe was slightly warped. And that was also a problem when you're all lying down trying to do sit-ups with this pole that's twisting in your arms.
Yeah.
And it just buggers up the whole rhythm. So we had favorite names for these bloody poles. We sort of got rid of them halfway through second phase, I think, and handed them over to the next intake with great joy. Just going back, looking at inspections. We had to obviously learn all the names of the kit, how they fitted together, and you've got a girth that runs from the saddle underneath the chest, the belly. You had to make sure that the horses didn't bloat, because a lot of them didn't like it. It was a little bit uncomfortable for them, and they puff out their chests a little bit, and you think, oh, that's nice, that's opened up nice and tight. And then once you you'd boop it up tight, and then they'd let the air out, and it's loose. You try and jump on, and the whole thing swings around, and your saddle's underneath its belly.
So they got a sense of humor, hey?
Oh yeah. The horses, it's quite funny. The equitation basics was balance. We did a lot of work at the beginning without reins and without stirrups. So it was just to find your seat and sit in the saddle and cross arms, or doing PT, or touching your opposite toe, and that was for you to find your seat and your balance. Lots of unofficial dismounts, and when that happened, obviously then you had to do the normal punishments, sit-ups, star jumps, burpees, that type of stuff.
I don't know if you're going to go. I don't know if you're going to go on to this, Alan, but could you just explain how your various phases of mounting, if you did it just naturally, or if you had to do it at speed, and also dismounting, did you have various tactics for getting off the horse quickly, etc.?
Mounting, you always mounted from the off side, or the left-hand side of the horse. And you'd put your left hand on the pommel, your right hand at your rifle. Or else you'd put your rifle over the horse's withers. It's between the shoulders, at the bottom of his neck. Hold your rifle there, and you would try not to use your right hand and grab the pommel, because that can pull your saddle off. Okay, you would have to use your knees to then up, and then swing your right leg over and into the saddle, and then find your stirrup. The horses got very used to it. Yeah, you didn't want your horse wandering off. So you had quite a tight rein. Normally your left-hand rein, your inside rein, would be a little bit tighter, so the horse's head was tilted in towards your shoulder as you stood facing the shoulder of the horse. And that was also to prevent them. Horses can't have to use their heads and their necks, and they bend, and as if they're running, if you're walking straight, their necks are straight. If you bend their necks to the left, they will move left. It's like a motorbike or a bicycle. And the same with the right. So you try to keep slightly tighter on your left rein when you're mounting, so that if they started wandering off, they would just walk in a circle, and they wouldn't be walking away from you, and you'd be hopping on one leg to try and get it over the back. But obviously you miss, and you would see your backside. We started riding with our weapons almost from the beginning, because the weapons were, I think they weighed about 7, 8, 9 kilograms. It's quite a lot of weight, and you wanted your horse to get used to a slightly unbalanced situation. You've got this, when you're sitting on a horse, you try and move your weight through what they call your seat bones, your pelvic bones, your bum bones, through down to your heels. And so there's a straight line from your shoulder through your hips into your heels. And that's sort of a neutral position. You'll see all sorts of different riding styles. The cowboys have long stirrups, and they sit deep in their saddles. And then you'll see the jockeys who have tiny little short stirrups, and they sit and they lift their weight right off the horse's back. Basically, all they want that horse's spine to be as supple, so that they could push all their muscle and into running hell of a fast. So when you're trotting, you'll see guys, it's called posting, standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down in a rhythm. That's called posting at a trot. And all you're trying to do is to take weight off the shoulders. The shoulder blades are right there in front of you, your hips. And all you're trying to do is take, as one leg comes back, the shoulder blade moves towards the saddle. You're trying to take weight off that as well. So you're giving the horse a chance. Once you move into a canter, you sit. Because a canter is a different type of gait, and it leads with one leg. You've probably seen me, what leads with one leg, and he'll either be on his off or his near, and he'll be leading. And if you change direction, what you want is the long leg, the leading leg, to be on the inside of the corner. Those are the sort of things that you have to learn. If you try and turn a corner and the horse is on the wrong leg, you'll start bouncing around. You'll feel it. The horse is unbalanced. You're unbalanced. You still got a rifle in your hand, and it goes to all around to a sore bum and probably a dismount, the unofficial dismount.
So really, you have to become the brain of the horse, reading its body language, where its hooves are, all that type of thing to make sure that you don't get thrown off, the horse doesn't stumble. It's quite an intricate art, really.
You're moving with the rhythm of the horse when you're
Yeah.
walking. You feel there's a definite rhythm, and your hips are rolling with the rhythm. You're watching a horse's neck, whether it's curving, and obviously, and you would have seen it. Horses will be moving their head down and they're trying to grab a piece of grass to eat, and totally switched off, and all they're doing is they're grazing with you on the back. You'll see them when you're trying to bring them in. It's called collecting. Just get their head up, and their forelock sort of more vertical, ears pointing forward, and then they're concentrating. They're also flicking their ears backwards and forwards the whole time. The interesting thing about horses, a horse is a prey animal. Okay, they live in herds, and the other thing about horses is their eyes are slightly to the side of their heads. Carnivores, which are hunters, eyes are in the front of their heads. So they have a different type of vision. And so a lion, a leopard are looking forward, and eagles, for example, as well, are looking forward, and they are focusing on something to prey on. A horse's eyes are slightly to the side, so you'll see them moving their eyes to the side because they don't have the same type of vision forward. But they have a lot of peripheral vision, because they're looking for prey, animals that are trying to kill them and eat them. And these are the little things you learn about your horse. Your horse's ears are flicking constantly. They are communicating with you. They're communicating with all the other horses, let's say in your stick as well. And all the guys will tell you when things start getting dicey. And there was an interview a couple of weeks ago. The horse's ears suddenly flick forward, and it was actually Franklin or something in the bush, which came up, or guinea fowl. They can see it. They've seen there's something funny, and then they jump away from it. Obviously, that's and you've got to be fairly deep in your saddle, not switched off and dreaming of Salisbury and your girlfriend, because you will get thrown. A horse can move very quickly when they get a fright. And that's a flight response.
Yeah.
So you've got to get used to all this kind of stuff. Other things that we had to start getting used to being in the saddle for 8 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours a day. And within the first 2 weeks of riding, the guys all had bare legs. On the inside of their legs, all their hair had been rubbed off. And it's like when you're at school and you pinch the hairs on somebody's back of his leg and they pinch them out. It's bloody sore. So within 2-3 weeks, everybody had bald legs, especially their calves, and also the bones of their bums. So we all looked like a bit of baboons when you go and shower, because with gentian violets on everyone's backsides, gentian violets on your calves, because you had to dry out the wounds, otherwise you start getting felt sores. But that's just an interesting aside.
A question for you, Alan.
Yeah.
I noticed in your notes here that you operated in sections of 8 horses. Do horses form a hierarchy and a pecking order? In other words, let's say the boss horse is at the back and he's always trying to come to the front all the time. Does the commander of the patrol have to ride the boss horse? In other words, to keep it at the front, or not?
Not really. They do. There is definitely a hierarchy when you look at horses in a paddock, free ranging. And it's something. It's like training dogs. You have to be the alpha. As the rider of that horse, you are the alpha, not the horse. So the horses will. They've lived with you for, let's say, 18, 20 weeks, a year. They understand that you are the alpha and you're in charge. So they don't just go wandering off. The problem is that some of the horses, and we'll get into it when we talk about remounts, is some of the horses were bloody minded, they were stubborn, and they would. And then they would start biting. If they didn't like you, they would start biting or kicking, something like that. And that is trying to establish dominance. And the guys had to be fairly aware of what their horses were doing. And if, a lot of the time the horses are just walking through the bush and they're fairly switched off. but they can get dominant, and they do fight as well. Like people, there's personality clashes and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about one of my horses when I was in Remounts, and I'll do that now because you're talking about it. Is that I had a mare she was a lovely horse, but she'd been sent back from A Squadron, and because she became bloody impossible at times, and no one could ride her. She would kick, she would bite, she would just gallop away, and no one could stop her. So she was sent back to Remounts for retraining and assessment, and I got her. And 4 or 5 days in a row, she'd be lovely horse, and I said, geez, I don't know what's wrong with these guys. This horse is great. And then she would get this bee in her bonnet, and she would kick you if you try to get near her, bite, all the rest of it. And I had another horse in my string called Hakeem. Hakeem was called a rig. Now, a rig has an undescended testicle because all our horses were gelded, so they like steers. So they were gelded. But sometimes you get an undescended testicle. The vet comes in with the dizzers, takes off the testicle, but one is still side and side, but he's still got all the testosterone of a stallion. So one of the guys said to me, and he was sort of joking, he says, this mare is bloody hormonal. So we wondered, and we thought, yeah, and you can tell when horses come into season because our mares were still full, intact. And you could tell when a horse came into season. And so he said, okay, well, we knew that Hakeem also used to get a little bit frisky around her. So we stuck her in the indoor riding school. And those guys went for it. And it sorted her out. She was just purely hormonal. It was, if we should have reported Hakeem as a rig to the vets to go and sort him out, because you don't want stallions running around in the bush, because then they do go and try and sort out the mares, and you don't want foals. But we did get a couple of foals at Grays. They were totally unintentional, but we got them because there were a couple of rigs in the 400-500 horses that we had there. So yeah, that's a little story there. Talking about
Ian, sorry, Ian, Alan, I beg your pardon. Because of time restraints, we're going to have to sort of move forward a bit. I just want to start going into what became your operational works. It's interesting what you've written here, how you could go 10 to 14 days without resupply. You could cover 25 to 40 kilometers a day. And when you came line on, so to speak, you'd have 5 meters between the horses covering a 40-meter front. Could you start going into some of the tactics that your training led into?
Yes, so in terms of tactics, we could walk and a normal infantry stick, for example, 8 guys, 2 sections, 2 sticks and 1 section, would normally have about 5-6 meters maximum between guys if they're walking in an extended line through a flay, or and that way even closer if they're walking through sort of scrub. On a horse, you're sitting 9 foot above the ground, and as a result, you can cover a much wider front. So if you've got 8 guys and you can put 25 meters between them, 1 section can cover a 200-meter front, walking in an extended line. If you could then start working at troop strength or platoon strength, it suddenly becomes a very big front, and you're looking down. If they're guys in cover, say the enemy in cover across a flay, they can see you, but you can cover that flay relatively quickly. They would, if you were to try and skirmish a flay about 200 meters wide, for example, that's a fairly slow process for the guys doing their buddy and skirmishing across. Whereas if you met on a horse, you could do that in half a minute. That really scares the enemy. They'd rather just put a couple of shots over your head and run away, but then you can chase them. Our standard operating procedures in terms of a contact was that depending on if we were in extended line or we were in single file, or in a column of is that depending on where the contact came, if it came from a flank, you would turn, you would face the enemy, and you would charge straight through the killing zone, past them. You would reform beyond that, and then you would decide, would you have a flanking movement, split 4 guys, move them, say, okay, go and do a flanking movement, and those guys would baleka to the right or to the left, form a flank, and they would either then become a stop group, and then you would drive through the contact zone, and vice versa. So you became very versatile. But the beauty about being on a horse is you can get to areas of which are better tactically, a lot faster than trying to run to a hill, for example, or to cover. A lot of people have said that it is well known that the enemy used to shoot high. Yeah, they did. You know, the first round might be semi-accurate, but then from then on, it's up into the sky. Very few guys were shot on the back of their horses, even though the enemy did shoot high. A couple of horses were shot in the chest or in the neck. Surprisingly, we had a mare. He was shot in the neck 3 times, 3 and 3s, and she was back on patrol 6 weeks later.
Amazing.
You know, it's so we didn't, you know, there were horses that were hit chest on with RPG 7s. That makes a mess, and obviously the horses don't survive that. But it saves, you know, if you look at the horse's chest and a man's chest, it burnt the guy on the back's horse, on back of the horse's legs, but he survived, but his horse didn't. So remarkably few casualties from that point of view. Most of the casualties happened once you'd gone into your inventory role on the ground, and but you would never charge on a horse really or chase. We did at times, but that's when you really got them in sight and they are running like hell. And you would run up behind them and shoot them. The other thing that we don't do is shoot off the back of a horse. It's the horse's ears are very sensitive. If you really want to take your life into your own hands, pull off a G3 or an FN or an RPD off the back of a horse, because the horse will object and will get rid of you. They don't like loud noises like that, although they were trained, which brings me on to another little amusing anecdote. We used to train the horses for gunfire to get used to the sudden noise and to be able to calm them down as quickly as possible. We were a multinational, multiracial unit, and we had a lot of Shangan trackers. And during the course of 79, we brought in about a dozen trackers, Shangans. Never ridden in their lives. It's not part of their culture to ride horses or donkeys or anything like that. But we had a nice indoor riding school with roof and sides and everything. And so it was the Sergeant Major Nick Van Giddens. He got these guys in. They all had their horses. But they didn't have saddles or anything. They were bareback, and he made them jump on the back of these horses. And then he let off a couple of rounds. Now, if you want to see people flying all over the place, we had these Shangans clinging around the horses' necks, you know, flat on the horses' backs, trying to not fall off. The horses are going mad. It was all part of the training for the horses, and galloping in circles, trying to get rid of these, get away from the sound. But the horses were trained for gunfire. Generally speaking, in a contact, and many guys, or Gordon Forrest will tell you, for example, as well, his horse was in many contacts, and literally he would dismount, they'd go into their normal infantry roles, and Gordon's horse would just wander off 10, 15, 20 meters away and just start eating. Wait for Gordon to come back. And horses being herd animals, they see that. They see a calm horse. They also tend to just hang around. They might gallop off 100 meters or 200 meters, but they would hang around because they're a herd, safety in numbers, and you would just wander through, find the horses and grab them. Other problem with horses is lion. We operated them a lot in Vic Falls and Collier Zoo area, Lone Star down at the Triangle and Rhodesia areas, and lion were a major problem. The lions, obviously, horses smell like horses. and they are prey. And we used to, you know, if you're on a long 14-day, 10-day patrol, the horses are sweating, they're tired, they're sweating, they're doing a lot of grazing, we're allowing them to do a lot of grazing on the way. And the lions picked up the smell, the scent, and they would start following us. Often, we would have to defy the game rangers and the zookeepers, and have to go and shoot an impala or something on the way out during the mid-afternoon so that the lions could have something to eat. But the problem with that is that you're also training them to follow horses because they're going to get a free meal. So it was frowned upon, but they were a major problem. We lost quite a lot of horses to lion. We had an incident down in, and the guys will tell you lots of incidents down in the southeast, but this was where I was involved. We were on I think it was a 7-day ambush on the Rhodesia River, just south of Wankie and by the hunting area, concession area. And we were trying to catch Zipro, who had come across from Zambia. They'd had a contact with 4 in depth near Jambesi, and they were following the Rhodesia River down to down to Botswana. So we had a full troop there, 1 troop. So we took the horses because in case we had to follow up after we had made contact, but we had corralled the horses inside the horse vehicles. So we used to, so we had a corral of vehicles, tied the horses up inside, gave them their hay and their food, and then 2 or 3 guys would stay behind and they'd do guard duty, guarding the horses, and the rest of the guys would cycle in and out of the ambush area. We were there for probably 2 or 3 nights, and the lions obviously had been sniffing around. They said, oh, here's some easy meat. And I was doing first beat, and you could hear scuffling in the bushes. It's pretty dry, it's winter, but you could hear scuffling in the bushes, and you would sort of protect and shout and, you know, sort of try and keep quiet because the guys were sort of on ambush about 1 kilometer away, and hand over to your next beat, go and sleep. The next morning, the lions had taken 2 horses out from underneath the vehicles, dragged them out, dragged them about 100 meters into the bush, and had a pretty good go at them. The guys who were guarding the horses didn't hear a thing, not a thing. You know, we had, you know, it's bizarre, but I've got a lot of time for lions. They're big animals. You don't realize how big they are and powerful.
Massive.
Yeah, you know, the jackals and the hyenas that used to follow us as well, they're relatively easy to deal with. But lions are a problem. We had all sorts of little...
I guess because they go for the throat, the horse can't even whinny or cry out, do they?
Yes, yeah, they strangle. So they basically strangle the horses, drag them down. If they're lucky, they can get a broken neck out of the dragging down and the weight.
Yeah.
Horses they go for the throat.
Alan, before we go any further, can you just give us an overview of the weapons that you carried? Personal arms, supporting arms, and that type of thing.
Yes, so it became quite controversial as from 163 onwards, excuse me, we were issued with G3s, Heckler and Koch, G3. It wasn't popular.
No.
Now, Grace was broken up into A Squadron and B Squadron. B Squadron were our territorials, and our A Squadron was regulars and national servicemen. The B Squadron guys just rebelled completely. They kept their old FNs. That's what they were used to. They were territorials, and to go and have to retrain them on G3s was not going to happen. Especially because they were coming and we basically had 2 squadrons in the field all the time, B Squadron and A Squadron, but operating in different parts of the country. So the B Squadron guys, they kept their FNs. In A Squadron, we had a stick made up of 4 guys, 3 G3s and an RPD. Now, some of the B Squadron guys also liked their MAG, but it's a heavy weapon to carry on the back of a horse. And pretty complicated because you've got you've got your ammo all around your neck and around your waist and all the rest of it, and to carry a heavy weapon. It unbalanced the horses quite a lot, as opposed to a G3, which was lighter than an FN. The biggest criticism about the G3 was that the furniture rattled like hell.
And it got hot when you fired it because it was metal, wasn't it?
It got hot, yeah. It had it wasn't a bakelite, but it was a sort of a nylon-y foregrip,
Yeah.
and with a whole lot of little holes in it to try and dissipate the heat. And the barrels also melted. They weren't the greatest barrels. There was up at the falls, the guys were saying that when that crossing happened in April '79, they were based at our base camp up at the falls.
Correct.
And you know, the guys just lined up on the banks and had a turkey shoot as the canoes and Zodiacs came down the river. Literally, those barrels were glowing red hot. And a couple of guys, after it was all over, you know, put their weapons down, leaned them against vehicles or against their bunkers, and they bent their barrels. So that really put the spooks up of the guys. They weren't happy to have them in the first place.
Horrible.
But but the furniture rattled, so you ended up taping all over the place. You taped all the pins to stop them rattling. The other thing, of course, is the butt was relatively weak. So if you had a quick dismount or all the rest of it and you went arse over tit, proverbially, you could snap off your butt quite easily, and guys did. RPD was great because RPDs you could use either a drum or a bag. They're lighter. They gave as much heavy power into contact, and so we used to carry one RPD, 3 G3s in a stick. So that would be 2 RPDs in a section. Within a troop, the guys would also carry an RPG-7, especially when we were going into Mozambique. So we would also have an RPG-7. We'd also have the Zulus, rifle grenades. Corporal Kufa Buku was a champion. Kufa died in a contact with Willie Loxton up at Chamabonda Flay in September '79. But Kufa used to patrol with a Zulu on the end of his rifle. That was his first round would always be a Zulu rifle grenade. And he was a champion boy. He could shoot from the shoulder, he would shoot him as a mortar roll, whatever. And then switch to magazine. So we had those. We also had obviously HEs, White Foss. So I think it was one on each chest. We had very nice chest webbing, which came from Three Spears in Cape Town, which became the precursor for the special forces in South Africa. They adopted it after we tested it, if I can say that. And that was a full-on chest webbing, lightweight nylon. There was space for your fart sack on the back. There was space for the A76 radio between your shoulder blades. The guys who had to carry the TR-48, which is also
very heavy.
Man alive, you don't want to bail off a horse with a TR-48 on the back thing because that's going to crush your skull. No one liked carrying that thing, but it was obviously the loot obviously needed that for long comms. So we had all the same as a normal infantry troop or platoon. A76s at one A76 per corporal, which is 4 guys. So you'd have a lance corporal or corporal and 3 troopies. And that would be the same structure, I guess, as most infantry sort of setups, if I can say that. The RPDs were actually a great weapon, eh?
You know, by that stage of the war, the Rhodesian Army, through Special Forces and supply from South Africa, had loads of AKs. I don't understand why you just weren't issued AKs.
It's a good point, and the R4, which came out of the Galil in South Africa, that would have been ideal. And guys who went from Greys through to Bereda in Potchefstroom after the war, they were issued with the R4, and they said it was an R5. They were great weapons. They were much shorter, much lighter, easier to handle on a horse. But yeah, but we were stuck with the good old G3, which we believe was liberated from Portugal.
Terrible, terrible weapons.
Yeah, but they worked. They were accurate. And they worked in dusty areas. We sort of, because of our versatility and our ability to work in terrain which foot soldiers battled in, and I'm talking sandy, flat areas, no water. The G3 was quite good in those sort of areas because it was pretty forgiving when it came to stoppages. Whereas the FN, you had a lot of issues with the gas fault. Especially if it hadn't been cleaned. Yeah.
Alan, sorry to push you along, but because of time constraints, you mentioned you'd like to talk about vets and farriers before we go on to some operational stuff.
Okay, so unlike the normal infantry battalions, we had a special group of guys which were the vets and the farriers, and we had at least one vet in the squadron. And depending on where the guys were operating from, we would have a vet up in the falls if there was only a troop strength at the falls and the other two troops were elsewhere. So we would have a vet there. And vets are useful because they can sew you up, they can give you injections, they can give you meds, whereas a lot of the other units obviously didn't have that expertise. So the vets were pretty versatile. Their job was to look after the horses, make sure that they were fit and ready for patrol. And then there were the farriers. All our horses were shod, steel shod. A horse's shoes last only about 6 weeks, especially when you're in rocky or sandy areas, they wear out. And you've got to trim their hooves and that type of stuff as well. So the farriers had a full farrier shop with an anvil and furnace and all that type of stuff, spare shoes, which they would fit, and each horse has a different size foot. So you would have to customize each shoe for the horse that you're shoeing.
And then you also mentioned you would like to talk about the remounts and squadrons A and B.
Yeah. Okay. So remounts was another HQ training troop section where we would have to, we used to source our horses from all over the country. We'd also used to go on buying trips down to South Africa, and we would get our horses, which were wild. They were like you see in the cowboy movies, the wild horses that were living in the velds in South Africa, in Natal, the Free State, the Limpopo area, as it's known today, the Northwest. And we would go there and we would buy the horses, stick them on the train, and then send them back up to Inkomo. So now these horses need to be broken in. They first assessed by the vets, broken in such that a new recruit could actually get on their backs. Now, part of their training was obviously what the recruits were doing when they were going in the lunging ring and getting to know their horse. But the remounts basically broke the horse, those bush horses in. We didn't like horses to be too tall, 16 hands, which is just under 6 foot at the shoulder, and too short, 15 2 hands, which is about just over 5'2", 5'3". So they were all sort of a pony type size. You didn't want big horses because big horses get problems with their bones. They tended to be thoroughbreds. We didn't take thoroughbreds either. Polo ponies were okay sometimes, but the thoroughbreds and X-race horses and that type of stuff were a no-no. They lost condition. So we had these what were called pads, and they were bush ponies coming out of South Africa. Good, strong, sturdy, bush-wise horses, but can be stubborn and tough. And at remounts, our job was to essentially take a horse and bring him to a point where a recruit can ride him after 6 weeks. It's pretty intensive. In remounts, we had about 4 or 5 horses each, and you just essentially rode horses all day, and you just take them through the riding school. You would take them on patrols. You would get them used to gunfire.
Because those horses came from a wild area roaming in the bush, were they more resistant to ticks than, say, a horse from Salisbury or the city? Had they developed some type of immunity?
No, they what they were generally, it's called salting. And if you go back into the old days, the tsetse fly, you couldn't take cattle and horses into tsetse fly areas. And I'm going back into the 1800s. There were vaccinations that you could give, but at the same time, the horses were pretty resilient. Yeah, they got ticks. We got ticks. And if you're sitting on the back of a horse walking through long grass, you're going to get ticks. Yeah, so they generally were. They could lose condition if the tick bite fever got them, a type of biliary. Yeah, it's bad news for a horse and it's bad news for people with tick bite fever as well. Yeah.
So, Alan, if we could move into a couple of operational scenes now, that would be interesting. It doesn't matter if you didn't have many operational events, but just give us an idea of some active patrols that you were on and what that entailed and how you dealt with the horses at night and, basically the tactics and maybe an incident or two that you were involved in.
Yeah, I think the one thing right at the end, and then I'm going to Operation Quartz because that was quite an interesting thing. We all passed out from 163 as national servicemen. We all passed out in January, so we cleared out, as they say in South Africa. As we were clearing out, we got our call-up papers. So we got our 10-day R&R, and we were back to Inkomo. And then we were sent up to the Sonoya area for the elections. I call them the Mugabe elections, which were in February, March 1980. We went to Sonoya, and our AP was AP Romeo, which was a Zipra camp, and it ostensibly held about 5,000 Zipra. And Clive Midlands actually talked about the commander of that
Yes.
camp. But what was quite interesting in there is to while we were there, our job was to escort any combatants into the AP, patrol the farming areas, the white farming areas, just to give the civilian and the farming community a little bit of sense of security that everything was under control, and then also cordon the AP to make sure that the guys weren't sneaking out and intimidating the locals for the voting. It became apparent that we weren't getting much cooperation, and our CO was Dumpy Pierce, Major Pierce. We weren't getting much cooperation from them, and obviously Special Branch was around and the cops and the police, and we weren't getting much cooperation. So they came up with a little story to swap combatants, and so they asked for 4 volunteers, Grey Scouts. Gordon Forrest was one of them, and they would be dropped into the Zipper camp, and they would give us 4 of their guys. I can imagine, we were all troopies there. We were not happy about the situation, but we needed to break the ice with the Zipper camp, and so the 4 guys went in there. Before they went, they had a whole lot of drills that they had to do for hot extraction. So they were trained and they were promised, and I believe that promise would be followed through as well. That if the shit hit the fan, they would be hot extracted from the camp. Be that as it may, it was quite interesting is that we got a lot of intelligence out of that camp. We had 4 guys in there, and we would resupply them on a couple of days. They would sneak around in the camp and find out where the defenses were and how many people were there, and we had 4 of them in our camp, which was probably 4 or 5 k's away. And so we were obviously also interrogating them and finding out their strength and numbers and type of training and all the rest of it. An interesting little anecdote there is one of the guys who came out. we were all standing around, and everyone was quite nervous. And this one combatant suddenly saw one of our guys, Bones Ford. Now, Bones was our regimental comedian, if I can say that. He's a legend. And this guy says, "Ha, Bones Ford." So Bones looks at him, and he's, Bones is, now he's been singled out, and you've got the whole squadron standing around and looking at these Zipra. And he starts giving Bones his whole family background. Now, Bones is a Bulawayo boy, and we're up in Sonoya, quite a long way away. But he says, your sister is this, your brother is that, your parents are this, and you lived at this address. You could have blown us all down with a feather, because Bones just said it used to be his gardener.
Oh.
And then that just broke the ice. It was, and having broken the ice, we were managed to get quite a lot of useful information out of that. In the background, we were also preparing for Operation Quartz. And Sergeant Major Kenny, who was our SSM, had built camp away from the guys who we had as hostage, if I can say that. As we got information, we built a camp, bunkers, command bunkers, trenches, the whole lot. And suddenly a truck came along, dumped a whole lot of helmets with us, and we were in full infantry mode from then on. We had to go and do trench clearing, bunker bombs, and we did this for days on end. It was exhausting, because we're talking now middle of summer, the humidity, and but by the time we were then just itching to get into Operation Quartz. What happened in the end, as we all know, is it never happened. The election results came out.
Can you just explain what Operation Quartz is for our foreign viewers?
Okay. Operation Quartz was a contingency plan. It was an operation that was put in place such that the Rhodesian security forces would attack the various assembly points where the Zipra or Zandler had gathered, and they would be taken out, apart from special operations that the SAS and the Zulu Scouts had to do, and the RNI for that matter, had to do in Salisbury, where they would take out the whole command structure and essentially have a military coup if Mugabe won the elections. This was all up to General Walls. At the end of the day, the instruction would go for Operation Quartz, and then all the different units who were guarding APs all had special operations to do. For example, I think Mugabe and his bunch were based up at the University of Zimbabwe, as it's known today, and they and armored cars would breach the walls and take out the command structure of Zipra and Zandler. It never happened. The call never came, and instead we were all formed up in parade in the bush, and Major Pierce and all the officers out in front, and said, "Guys, we've got some news." And we were all waiting, and he says, "Well, we've lost. Mugabe's won the election." And that was it. You could have heard a pin drop.
Terrible.
Then obviously you could hear some muttering in the ranks, and guys were starting to cock weapons and that type of stuff. Because we had 4 hostages, and they were ready to some of the guys were ready to climb in and start the war operation.
That's terrible time that was.
Yeah, Sergeant McKenny, who is Sergeant Major Kenny, was an ex-SAS Sergeant Major, French Foreign Legion as well. Tough bastard. He could see, he could read the mood, and in his broad Cockney accent, put a stop to it, sent us all back to our tents, and that was it. We went back to our tents to sulk. It was such a letdown. such a letdown. You can't explain it. The disappointment, the training, the at the time, the blame game that went around is that were you done wrong? How did it happen? Had we been cheated?
I've often wanted to know why the order wasn't given. Something happened with General Walls, something happened. Somebody was bought out or promised something. I don't know what happened, but I'd left the army at that stage. I was in the police, actually, training part 2. And I was with a rapid reaction stick in the northeast of Salisbury in the operations room when the results of the elections came through. We were given them probably the day before the main population was. And I'll never forget, a couple of guys were so angry, they literally threw their rifles through the windows with the windows shut, because it was April, it was cool, and the windows were closed. And the rifles went through the windows, and they just left camp. And it was horrifying.
Yeah, the guys kept their discipline. I must say, the guys who were on call up, because we're now on call up. The regulars had to stay behind. The call up guys they came and fetched us and took us back to Inkomo, and we demobbed. The regulars and quite a few of the guys from 163 signed on regular, thinking that they had a good 3-year contract in front of them, good money. And literally they'd signed up 6 months, 9 months before this all happened, and suddenly they'd just been kicked in the guts. It was tense. We had our final parade in May 1980, where as much of the B Squadron guys and the A Squadron guys were called up, and we had a final parade, and it was still subdued. The guys were still subdued. They were still shell-shocked by the result, but defeated. There was one of our guys, Earl Wakeford, after the elections, but before we had our final parade, he signed up regular. He was shot in an ambush by these separate guys at AP Romeo. They didn't just let them go after the elections. He was shot in an ambush. And so there was still quite a lot to go on.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So that was AP Courts. Operation Courts. There's a lot to talk about, Tony. You could talk about personalities, officers. On the whole, we had some great officers. Like in any unit and in any army, people who were good operators. We had some tragedies as well, where we lost 2 of our lieutenants in the space of 3 weeks, September, October 79. Willie Loxton up at Channel Flame, and Canvas Tennant, he was a regular officer as well. That was in October of 79. We had some really great NCOs. Think of Mike Wilkinson, who got a Bronze Cross with Graves in 79. What a quiet, unassuming but Makunya soldier. He was our Sarge in one troop. Clive Midlane, Clive was my corporal. I'll tell you stories about Midi. Also, when we were looking over AP Romeo, our loot, no names, no pactoral, took us within the exclusion zone. Map reading, as we know, officers are great at map reading. So anyway, he took us within the exclusion zone, and we found.
Having been one, I'd have to disagree with you.
Yeah. Anyway, Midi grabbed the map book because we were starting to feel uncomfortable, and things were really quiet. And you can tell when things are not great. The birds aren't doing their thing. It's very quiet. We're on a foot patrol, and it had been raining in the afternoon, and we came to a small kopje, and Midi, in the back of his mind, sort of understood, had been working with the maps, and he says, this is not in our zone. We're inside the exclusion zone. So he grabbed the map, and the loot was, and he confronted the loot and said, "Sir, I think we're inside the exclusion zone and we had better get out of here because it's getting dark. It's been raining. They're going to see us work if they do a clearance patrol of their own." And we were just sitting there. Midi had we were all having a quick smoke break. Midi's smokes were wet. And so he was in this bent cigarette like this. And he's muttering under his breath, and he says, "This guy's going to kill us. He's brought us too close." You could see on the map that we were in the exclusion zone. Anyway, nothing happened. We stayed the night. It was too dangerous to move. So we stayed the night and snivelled out in the next morning. But yes, that was interesting. And yeah, Midi was great. He sort of took charge once he'd seen the competence of the guy.
We've only got 8 minutes left on this video. I think we'll have to end it on this one. Did you not serve up at Vic Falls at all? You mentioned something about Chamabon de Flay.
Yeah. Okay. So
if you could just give us
Vic Falls was a main base camp for Greys. We had a permanent presence up there, and initially we were up at the Sprayview airstrip, and then we were moved down to next to the Azambezi River Lodge. There was a caravan park there.
Yeah, very familiar with it. Was that under Theo Williams?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So Theo was our captain, our OC of A Squadron. And we always had a permanent presence in there. On our first bush trip, we left from Inkomo and we went up there as a squadron. And then after our first bush trip, we went back on R&R, and then one troop went back to the Falls, and 2 and 3 troops were sent down to the southeast. Our job up at the Falls was to do the drag. Now, the drag is a strip right next to the tar road that runs from the Falls through to Kazangula and the Kazangula ferry. There was a strip of bare ground, sand, which us and the 4 RR trackers used to patrol every morning. So we would take 8 guys, a section. We'd take our horses, load up our horses, meet the 4 RR trackers, AJ Bradnick and those guys. And we would then do the drag and look for any crossings that had happened between the mine fence and up to Chamabon Flag. If in the case that we found crossings, we would dismount, get off the vehicles, take the horses off, load, and then we would start following the spur. It didn't happen often. Because we were right next to the Azambezi River Lodge, and then the minefield started straight after that. You would hear the minefield going. Generally speaking, it was game. They wandered into the minefields, but on occasion it was crossings where the guys had got their bearings wrong, and they'd come in downstream of Hippo Creek and walked in and landed inside the minefield. Hippo Creek was actually quite a favorite place of ours, a very nice ambush position. And there was because the way the river comes down from the north and then turns to the east at Hippo Creek, you get quite a lot of eddies and you get a lot of backwash there as well. And following the big contact on the river in April, up at Hippo Creek, there was a lot of dead Zipra floating around in Hippo Creek as well, with all their weapons floating in the clear water. But I'm afraid that no one had the guts, because there were some big crocs there as well, black dogs. And you could see these RPG-7s lying in the bottom of these pools, AKs, S-cases. And but no one had the guts to jump in the pond and go and haul some out for booty or bounties.
Well, Alan, I actually saw that with my own eyes, because I was based up there when that happened. I saw those.
Yeah, no, you can see them there, and it's, oh man,
and the tourists on the boat thought that they were hippos. big puffed up Charlie Tangos.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Just after that, in May, there was they did attempt another crossing. and we went across to Kandahar, and swept the Kandahar Island. It's a really marshy, dense jungle there. It was like in Vietnam, and I could imagine Vietnam. Not a great place.
No.
But anyway, we didn't find anything in there. But I'm not surprised that the undergrowth is thick. I think if they saw us coming across, I think the police launchers took us across. They could have been hiding there, and we wouldn't have seen them. That was thick undergrowth there. Yeah.
Alan, it's been a fantastic talk. I've really enjoyed it, especially the training and how you got familiar with your horse, and you know, you sort of became two animals in one, so to speak. Very interesting, and I'd like to thank you very much for coming on board. And maybe, if you're willing, you'd like to do a remembrance talk on the guys that died, those Lutes. We can always arrange that behind the scenes. We've done 6 of them now. Would be nice if you're willing to do that. But thank you very much for being such a willing partner to come on board. And I'd like to encourage all the viewers, please. We find it very hard with our reducing number of guys from the war to actually find people to come on board and have a talk. I'm sure Alan will tell you here that it's not difficult to do so. You're just talking about something that happened in your life, and I'll try and help you where I can to walk you through it. So please do get hold of me on Facebook, Tony Ballinger, and we'll see if we can slot you in for a talk in the future. But Alan, once again, thanks very much, buddy, and I wish you all the very best. I'll contact you in the next day or two about doing a remembrance talk for the guys that you mentioned earlier.
Yep. Great. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Tony, and thanks for all the work that you guys are doing.
It's a pleasure.
I love them. I think I've watched them all.
Excellent. Thank you very much for coming on board. And I do apologize for calling you Ian, but I've got
no worries.
I've got a bone of contention with a guy called Ian at the moment, and his name's stuck in my brain here. Anyway,
no, that's fine. No worries.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Go well.
Bye-bye.